everybody. I want to welcome you to our first ever Film Seizure interviews. I'm Geoff Arbuckle.
I'm Jason Oliver.
And we are sitting down to talk with writer, director, producer Tony Wash. We have recently featured him on one of my episodes of Monster Mondays with The Rake, but he's also the director of Skeletons in the Closet and High on the Hog, and several other short films like A Chance in Hell and The Muck, which was seen briefly at the beginning of Skeletons in the Closet. So, Tony, welcome. Congratulations on being our first interviewee. For what it's worth, we appreciate you taking some time and reaching out to us too. It was great hearing from you after I discussed The Rake.
Well, I heard your interview talking about The Rake, or your review of it, and I was really just impressed with how in depth you took your review of the film. A lot of people don't give that film, I think, the attention that it deserves and the analysis that it deserves, and you did.
How do you find that balance? How do you find the balance of what you love to do and the passion of what you do with Scotchworthy and filmmaking, but also, pay the bills, right? I mean, I imagine sleep is at a premium for you.
I don't know how. Everybody obviously juggles their priorities differently, and in the independent film industry, at the very least, I have just as many friends who do it full time, and I have just as many friends who have a full time job, such as myself. And there's obviously positives and negatives to both. To both sides of it. I'm very fortunate that I have a government job, so I'm still working right now. The downside to that is that I'm working, so it's like I don't have the extended free time that a lot of other people have now. But I would much rather be working and getting a paycheck than not working right now, like a lot of people that are unfortunate, and such as my fiance, as I said. A lot of my film friends, the guys who are helping me with these watch parties, they're out of work right now. And so this is giving them something to do. But, as much as I like having their availability more or less wide open, I'd much rather if they were out there working, because not only are they paying their bills and not as pissed off that they're not paying their bills, but they're also networking. They're also building their experience levels and beefing up their portfolios. And so, but with me, it's, I work overnights at a water plant, and luckily it's a stressful job in the sense of I'm responsible for a lot of multi-million-dollar equipment, but the machinery really runs itself. So, you just have to be there and attentive and make sure that things are okay. And so when I leave that place, unless I'm on call, I don't have the stress of a job, where I'm making good money, but it's eating away at my sanity while I'm not there. Right. And I think that's how I best juggle it, is that I have 48 hours a week that I'm working, but when I'm not working those 48 hours, I'm able to really focus on anything else. And the biggest juggle right now is the fact that my fiance and I are closing on a house next Friday, and we're trying to start a family. So it's like the personal aspect of my life is really starting to grow and prosper, whereas a couple of years ago when I was single and I was bartending and only focusing on film, that gave me 100% freedom to do really whatever I wanted, and including taking a month and a half off to shoot a movie, which I can't really do anymore.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dynamic shift in my life, but I'm almost 40, and you get to that point where you kind of tell yourself, do you want to, what road do you want to try and take through the rest of your life? And I'm pretty excited about the way that mine's looking so far.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I think that, one of the things that you had mentioned in the Skeletons in the Closet commentary that I found might be also something that's really important just in general for like indie horror, but also some of the stuff that you were just talking about was like how collaborations can really then start to grow where you don't have to feel like you're doing everything yourself. If you have the right collaborations, if you have the right people with you, then some of those things, some of those stresses that would have been, I guess, you would have been more free to tackle when you were single, when you were 100% focused on movies. Now you have a different path that you might be able to use some of those collaborations and use some of those people that you're working with as well.
Well, I think that's a great point, and I have to really commend and tell you how much I appreciate your research of the stuff that Scotchworthy's done, because, you know, oftentimes you'll get on a show with a podcaster and they won't know a damn thing about you, and it's like, why are you interviewing me if you're not, one, informed of who I am, and two, interested in what I've done, you know?
Yeah.
So I appreciate how thorough it is, and that's really why I was excited about this in the first place, because of how thorough and in my opinion, well informed your review of the Rake was, which I hope we talk about in a little bit here.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
But no, you know, when I had, and I've said this multiple times, when I did It's My Party and I'll Die If I Want To, I didn't do it on my own, but I wore 100 hats while I was shooting that movie, after we were done shooting the movie and I was, you know, in post-production on it, and then even selling and promoting the movie. And that's not to say that I didn't have some amazing crew members or co-producers, or, you know, my old business partner, Chris Patrick, who was an instructor at the Savini School for a while, did an awful lot to help make that movie happen. You know, he was the guy who I was able to sit down with and say, here's these scene ideas, what do you think? And then Chris and I would spitball back and forth, and he would help me come up with awesome ideas for the development of the characters and the scenes. My roommate when I was at school in Pittsburgh, Stephen Weimer, who's a co-producer on It's My Party, was an integral aspect of the completion of that film, because he was on set with me literally every night. And, you know, we're going to school during the day, and I was still bartending and serving at Chili's at the time. So it's like we were squeezing it in at, you know, 2, 3 in the morning to shoot these scenes. And meanwhile, the girls that are in the scenes are going to school at a university 20 minutes away. They're all acting majors there. And so there was a lot of help, and that is how that movie got completed. But I'm also saying that I was, like I said, wearing, and everybody was, you know, Steven, Adrian, the star of It's My Party, Darcy, Danielle, every single one of us was wearing multiple hats at that point. You know, an actress might be holding the boom mic at one point when she's not on screen. And what I really learned from that was not even from putting people in positions that they're not experienced in, but in my own shortcomings, because I was the cinematographer on It's My Party, and I am really disappointed with how it looks. A lot of people like it because they think it looks like an old VHS 80s horror movie, and that's the feeling I was going for. Very Creepshow, Evil Dead, Night of the Demons. The problem with it is that, you know, there are still technical aspects of it that, had I known more about using a camera, then I would have been able to fix them. Like I just thought I used the Canon XL2, which is a really nice prosumer standard definition camera back in 2004 when I bought it, or 2005. But it's like, if you turned, you know, they had the gain setting. And so I'm looking at it and saying, okay, well, the gain is going to increase the amount that I can see, the amount of light that I'm getting in the camera. So I just pumped my gain up to 12 plus decibels. And, you know, the shutter speed, I'm like, oh, if I bump the shutter speed all the way down to 1/24th, I can make the room brighter. And so then all of a sudden, and the same thing with my aperture, I bumped it all the way open. I think it was to like 2.8. And so now I've got as much light as I can get into my camera, which is making everything brighter, so that my crappy 500-watt work lights I bought from Lowe's are actually lighting a room, you know, appropriately. But the problem is that by bumping your gain up and your shutter speed and everything, it causes the image to stutter and whatnot. And so, you know, there are moments in the movie, like when you're outside during the daytime, that it just doesn't look polished. And so, getting back to what you were originally saying, it's all about putting people in the right places and not spreading yourself too thin as the creative, because you're able to focus more on doing what you should be, which is talking to your actors and making sure there's a cohesion between everything on set, all the department heads. But you don't have to focus on those departments because you've got people you can trust in those positions. And that's huge. It's everything.
I think that you really illustrate that with the Rake. It's just it felt like a huge jump, even from Skeletons in the Closet to the Rake. Your camera work, your cinematography, the acting, it really did feel like you were able to put everybody in the right place and take the time with the things that really mattered to make that movie work. We both like it a lot. I think it's a great slow burn horror, and like Geoff mentions in his Monster Mondays, you don't see that as much anymore. A horror movie that really takes its time and lets you kind of settle into the nightmare, right? So I guess I'm curious a little bit about what your approach to the Rake was. What did you feel like you accomplished what you wanted to with that? It certainly feels like you did, but what what I guess for you, did you set out to do when you started making the Rake?
Well, thank you for the compliments. I mean, again, you guys are the exact fan base that I was trying to appeal to with the Rake, and it means everything that there are people out there that see the Rake for what we were trying to accomplish with that story and that style, and that really lends itself a lot to your previous question, where I was not the only producer on this. I had 4 co-producers on our end, and then we had partnered with a company in LA that brought some people out too. But my 4 co-producers, Robert Patrick Stearns, my cinematographer, so he managed the lighting and the camera departments and made sure all the technical stuff was going to be top notch. At one point we were shooting with 3 red cameras, and I never would have been able to orchestrate that type of equipment, but Rob was able to pull in favors and make that happen, as well as get together an amazing crew of grips and G&E guys and girls, and so that's what he did to alleviate some of my stress. Sarah Sharp was a co-producer who not only handled a lot of the orchestration and logistics, but she also was the production designer. So she had her entire art department doing things. And these are all people that she'd worked on multiple projects with, because she's been a production designer for a decade now professionally. And she could pull in the best of the best to cherry pick and make on this, be the team that she wanted on this film. And Angela Verdino, who handled all the production coordination. I mean, this lady was in this basement office that we had set up in this house that we were shooting in, kind of like where like that aborted fetus is and stuff in the basement. Right. If you go down to the stairs and turn to the left, there was another little like alcove of the unfinished basement where there was a full bathroom that we were doing makeup stuff in. And then there was there was a whole section where we had our data wrangler, who was kind of transferring the data off of the cards from the cameras onto the computer, and that's Jim Peterson, who's the 5th producer. And he was really ensuring that all of the information that we gathered was safe and backed up multiple times. And then Angela's over there sitting at a table the entire time working on contracts and paperwork and orchestrating meals and everything. And that's how you do it, and when you're starting out, you don't have the opportunity to gather a crew like that, because you don't have the money or the experience to support the magnitude of a production, But in this case, the Rake was produced in 2015. We had shot, I did It's My Party and released that in 2007. And so that's now 8 years later that I had done A Chance in Hell in 2010, which really showcased to a lot of people, for the sake of sounding a little cocky, it showed a lot of people my ability to lead a larger production. I had anywhere from 20 to 60 people on set when we were shooting A Chance in Hell every day. So people saw that and they said, this guy can handle that degree of orchestration. So they were a little more confident in becoming a partner with me on future projects. And then we also did High on the Hog between 2010 with A Chance in Hell and 2015 with, the Rake. Well, Skeletons in the Closet was done all along the way. We started shooting Skeletons in the Closet in 2012. It was originally called Chop Shop. And then we finished shooting it in 2017, released it in 2018. So it started as my second feature, but technically turned into my fourth feature. So it was just a build-up over the last decade of the film family growing, and everybody brings somebody or multiple people to the table, and then we cherry pick, the best people for each position, and thankfully then I'm able to focus more on direction as opposed to producing. And it's not even like that's me saying, okay, now I can do it. It's them telling me, now that we're handling this stuff, stop orchestrating, stop being logistical, talk to your actors, focus on your script, talk to your cinematographer and your effects designer and make sure everything looks the way you want it to look. And so that's getting to what you were saying at this point now. That's really what I think happened, is that, we were working we were trying to develop a feature-length version of The Muck. I don't know if you've seen The Muck.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow, you guys did your research.
Yeah, we watched The Muck. I figured it was a full short when it was plugged into Skeletons in the Closet. I was like, I bet you they used something that they created before and put that in there, and I found it. Yeah, I love it. I really love how you set that whole bathtub scene up with the way the camera moves, and you kind of keep it off of her face as she undresses. It's really well orchestrated. I enjoy that. I think it was only 3 minutes long, but it tells like a nice little concise, perfect little horror story.
That is a prime example of the perfect cohesion of people who work well together. Rob and I started working together in 2012. The very, February of 2012 is when we started working together. We shot High on the Hog. We shot Skeletons in the Closet. We've done PSAs. We did a reality pilot in Colorado. We shot The Muck. The Rake, obviously. So Rob and I have been working together for a long time, and The Muck is a great example of where I had a shot list of, here's what I want to do. We need to show this woman come home, go upstairs, get undressed, take a shower, or take a bath and get eaten by a monster. And I was like, well, what if we did this? And Rob's idea was, let's make each shot count. Let's we're not using the camera for the sake of telling her story, leading her from position A to position B. We want the camera to be a part of the style as well. And by having Rob suggest that and incorporate a lot of these slow dolly moves and stuff, that's really what gives it that visual style. And then once we started going that route, then it became a matter of him and I developing these shots together. But it was really him to initiate that concept. And that's why I'm so thankful that these people see whatever they see in me to want to continue working with me, because oftentimes I'm sitting on set watching all the hustle and bustle moving around me. It's like those scenes in like music videos and movies where like the person's in slow-mo and they're watching everybody else zooming by. And I'm just like, how did I get so lucky to be in the spot that I'm in, surrounded by all this talent and all this diligence? And so that's really what it boiled down to on The Rake, is we were working on the feature-length version of The Muck, and after half a year in 2014 of traveling the bigger festivals and trying to talk to producers, and we had a feature-length script for The Muck and everything, it didn't end up, we couldn't find the money. And so we just said, you know what, we're going to take a break. And during that break, I sat down with my effects supervisor, Jason Kane, and was disappointed, because I was really excited. I thought The Muck, after going to South by Southwest and Screamfest, and that we were going to be able to kind of like get to that next tier. We'll raise $1 million or $1.5 million, and we're going to make a real movie. And when it didn't happen, I was so disappointed. And Jason said, well, screw it. Let's make a movie. Even if it's just you and me, let's just make a movie. And Jason, I appreciate that mentality, but it's still that's very amateur of you to say the two of us are going to go out and make a movie.
Right. A bit naive, maybe.
Exactly. It's like, look, we'll make a $5,000 feature, but it's not going to look good,
Right.
And I want stuff to look good. It's very important to me that everything we do progressively gets better. And because they say you're only as good as your last project,
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, well, why don't we look into creepypastas? Let's do the Rake, and I knew what Slender Man was, but that's the only thing I knew. So we started kind of researching the Rake, and after I read a bit about it, I went and talked to Robert Patrick Stern and Sarah Sharp, and I said, here's this idea that Jason pitched to me. I really think we could do something with it. And that was October of 2014, and by March of 2015, we were shooting the movie. It happened so fast.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did the money come together for that? I'm just curious.
So we had 5 co-producers on my end, and we each kind of either put a little bit of money in ourselves or found some money. I bartended for 10 years at a restaurant in the suburbs of Chicago, and a lot of my regulars are my parents' age. And so I have a lot of, secondary, tertiary parents out there,
Nice.
or aunts and uncles, so to speak, that listen to, when they would come in, it's like, I wasn't so much always listening to them, or hardly ever listening to them talk about their lives. It was more so them sitting down saying, what's going on with you? How is your life? Because they thought of me like a son. And so I was very fortunate that when we started producing this, they had known me for 5 years at the time, and were like, oh, you're putting together a movie, we'd love to help. And so each of them put a little bit of money in, and the Rake isn't a large budget. It looks bigger budget because of the sweat equity, equipment, and people putting in. None of my co-producers and I got paid to do that movie, so it was just a passion project for us. And so that's how we were able to make that happen. And a lot of our crew was, again, thankfully for the reputations of my co-producers and my department heads, people want to work with them. They know that they're go-getters and that they're going to do quality stuff. So people want to be surrounded by that and a part of it, because they know that they'll be able to use this project as, something on their portfolio that actually looks legitimate. And since then, a lot of these people have gone on to do major things. Angela is a full-time, she doesn't do production, but she does full-time union, like, art department and wardrobe on major shows like True Detective and stuff. And, these effects artists are working for ADI and Legacy, the guys that we had on the show the other night. And, Jason, my effects supervisor, did the mask for Clown for Slipknot for the Gray Matter album, or Gray Chapter album. And, and Rob is shooting, he's Emmy nominated. I didn't realize that they were, but he told us that the other day, that they were nominated for an Emmy for The Shop, which is that LeBron James show on HBO.
Oh, yeah.
They shoot that. And there's just the fact that everybody's been able to kind of spread out and do stuff is really awesome. And that's a testament to how talented and dedicated they are to their jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, does that, so having those people who have those reputations and stuff, I have to imagine that helps with buy-in as well, getting the people to, come in and commit, like, come in and actually commit professionally and want to do things, want to take the direction and so forth. I have to imagine that helps with that.
100%. I don't even know I'd say 70% of the crew. I don't even know them until the team brings these people on set and says, here's this person, they're going to be gripping for the day. And then I meet that person, and thankfully they tend to become a film family member after that, But a lot of us have been working together for a decade now, It's not just Rob and Sarah and Jason, these names that I bring up on a consistent basis. There are so many other people that have all been involved. Like I said earlier, Kiko Edward is a friend of ours who's a film. He does mostly camera work and lighting, and he's just always been very instrumental in being part of. He's Rob's right-hand man, and he hardly ever gets mentioned. And he doesn't knock on my door and say, you're an asshole for not talking about me. But if it wasn't for him, Rob's stuff wouldn't look as good. Kiko is the focus puller, Yeah. And Rob says that all the time. He's like, if I didn't have you pulling my focus for me, everything would be out of focus.
Right. Now, a couple of things that I wanted to touch upon. One being, we were talking about the muck, and I always pick up on little, like, character things. And I just wanted to say that I got like a little chuckle out of how much the lady kept wanting to have music on. Like she had headphones, and then she goes into the bathroom, puts in a tape. She couldn't do anything without music. It's just those little things that seem insignificant, but they are like real life people things. So I also wanted to say when we were talking about the muck that I appreciated that in terms of like the little character moments there. Just the little things sometimes makes just sometimes make something for me.
Well, do you know why I did that?
No.
I mean, we knew that because there's no dialogue in the movie. Literally, the only dialogue is when I'm talking to her on the voice message,
Oh, yeah.
on the answering machine. So other than that, there's no dialogue. So knowing that there was no dialogue, I knew that music was going to have to drive it like a music video. And so I wanted it to seem like she had something to interact with at all times at an auditory level. So it was very important that we're not just listening to the music as an audience, she is too, because it further involves us in the situation, and it gives her something to do, quite frankly.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because, even if the short is just a few minutes long, few minutes with not much to do can take forever.
Yeah.
And
it helps engage the audience, yeah.
And you have to pace it appropriately too. Mm-hmm. If she wasn't listening to music, think about it. When you're moving from point A to point B, when you're going to your refrigerator, grab a glass of milk or a Coke, you walk to your refrigerator, you open the door, you grab the Coke, you pop it open, and you drink it. Whereas with her, she's dancing around her kitchen. She's dancing down the hall and up the stairs. And it gives it more of a fluidity, but also more of a pacing as well. It's not like she's motivated intentionally to go from point A to point B, and that's all it is a transportation from one spot to the next. She's making the movement part of the music and the experience for the audience.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes perfect sense. And yeah, it's just, again, it's one of those kind of, subconscious things that you see and you pick up on and you connect with it, even if, like right there, it's like I didn't really put two and two together, but I still connected with it, and I think that's a really good visual thing.
I feel like, just quickly kind of mentioning, I feel like a lot of independent films, though I appreciate that people, horror is so filled with content, the genre, which is great, because I'm a horror fan through and through, have been my entire life, and so I love that there's so much content out there, but at the same time, it's like there's a lot of content that doesn't take the time. The filmmakers didn't take the time to really develop it appropriately, so it's like, oh, well, teeny bopper is getting killed by a killer in the woods. Been there, done that. It's easy to do. I'm not saying you can't make it interesting, but it's so cliche that it's like, you're just dealing with all the familiar tropes, whereas if you actually take the time as a storyteller, a visual storyteller at that, to develop all those nuances, not just with the visuals, but also with the characters and with everything. It's so much as whether you give a character a limp or a stutter or, a certain type of clothing that they wear. In High on the Hog, the one actress, Brenda Marie Whitehead, who plays Lola, she's always got a sucker in her mouth. And the reason is because I wanted to give her an oral fixation. I wanted the audience to understand that this girl is like, and she's a bit of a slut in the movie. She's like been with the farmhand and, so it's like, to me, there's those types of things that a character's not just about what clothing they're wearing and what their personality's like. You've got the stoner, you've got the athlete, you've got the ditz. It's not just about that. It's about building so much more around that personality that I think is important when you're developing something for a movie.
Absolutely.
To go along with that, it really did feel like you were able to work with your actors a lot more on the Rake. It just felt like you probably, obviously they're all pretty good actors, but that they had a real good understanding of what you were trying to accomplish and what their motivations were and how they should be reacting to things. It really came out. I guess the question is, how do you work with actors? What's the approach you take when talking to them about their scene or about their motivations or what you want to get out of them, and how much do they bring to it as well? We are both fascinated by the character of Andrew in the Rake. So if you want to use him as an example, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. And once again, it really means a lot to me that you guys analyzed the film as much as you did, because The Rake to me was, when we were producing that movie, that was the film that I looked at and said, I made it. You know, I've been dreaming of being a movie director my entire life, as long as since I was like 10 or 11 years old. That's what I wanted to do, was make movies. And I worked in a video store in high school, and so it's like, to be 30 at the time, I was 34 years old shooting The Rake. And I had LA, Hollywood actors out working on it, and we had, big cameras and everything. I was like, this is the real deal. And so to have that feeling and then be able to work with professional talents, both in the crew and the cast capacity, was a real amazing experience at the time. And so what we kind of went into was, we were initially trying to do it non-union. And so we reached out to all the cast members that we'd worked with in the past that were non-union, that we thought were going to be good enough to handle a psychological thriller, drama, horror film, not just, running through the woods without my top on, getting chased by a guy with a machete. It's great. I love that. I'll watch those movies till I die, but that's not the movie we were making.
Right.
I wanted to make Alien meets The Shining. That was my goal. Atmosphere, tension building, slow paced, but then when the shit hits the fan, the shit really hits the fan.
Yeah.
Right. And a focus on practical special effects. And so we started, talking to these different actors and stuff. And when we ended up partnering with the LA team, they were the ones who created these Skype interviews that I would basically do with some of these cast members. And that's how I found Rachel Melvin, which was awesome, because I had literally just watched Zombievers like a couple weeks beforehand. And here I am talking to the star of it, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And, obviously her being in Dumb and Dumber 2, I was just like, I remember watching that commercial and being like, damn, that girl's cute as hell. Who's that? And then, now she is starring in my movie. It was super cool. And then, they brought Shanae Grimes-Beach to the table, which was awesome because she was an amazing actress. Joey Bachicki, who was Andrew, was part of their team as well. And he's kind of the conduit of how we initially got partnered up with them in the first place, because he's originally from Chicago. And so we reached out to him, and he shared the script for The Rake with his producing team. And they said, oh, this is super cool. Can we be a part of it? And we love the muck. We want to help you, make a new movie. And there's positives and negatives to partnering with people with a different vision, because, that ends up working itself out throughout the process of making a movie. You start with the development, with the script, you get to the production, and then you do post-production and the release of it. And so we really had a good sense of control over pre-production and production. But then once we handed it off for the edit, that's where, I had, noticed you very acutely had come up with some criticisms about some of the character development, some of the backstory for the creature mythos and stuff. And that is all stuff that unfortunately was edited out of the film for the sake of shortening it and stuff. And that's not necessarily something that I wanted to do. But at the end of the day, you have to kind of do what, the editor was Sam Bauer, who did Donnie Darko. And so when you've got someone who edited Donnie Darko, which is a cult classic that I'm sure the three of us grew up on,
Yep. We've even
Absolutely.
covered it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, there's a part of me that's sitting there. I'm like, well, how do I like not trust his vision, and with what control I have over it, I kind of just have to let him do it because they want him to do it. And so, I'm totally on a tangent, and I apologize. I think that, like, trying to get back to your original question, it's just a matter of like saying, while we were on set, I was able to sit and talk to the actors. And when I develop a character with an actor, I obviously have my own ideas in my head, just as much as when we were talking visually about the Muck. To me, the Muck looked different than it turned out because Rob brought his talent to the table and gave it that beautiful gliding look throughout the entire film. And if it wasn't for those camera movements, the Muck wouldn't be nearly as good as it is. And so that's kind of what we do too, is I'll sit down with an actor and I'll say, what do you see in this character? How do you see yourself portraying this character? And I let them really kind of give me their scope of the character's personality traits. And then I kind of interject and we mold it together, because I am a firm believer that when you are creating art as a collective, every member of the collective has to feel like they're instilling their artistic, edge to the project as well. Otherwise, they're just a set of work hands, and that to me is not how you keep people enthusiastic on a project. And so Andrew is no different than any of the other characters. I was fortunate to have amazing cast members that have a lot of experience in being dramatic. And so they weren't very hard to work with. A couple of them at times were a little more defensive about their personality traits and the way they wanted to take the character. And it's tough sometimes because, especially when they have reputations or they've done a lot of stuff, you have to be able to find a way to tell them that it's still your film and your vision without insulting them, because you don't want to lose their respect. But, thankfully with Andrew, for example, he was the one who really, Joey was the one who really took to that character and wanted to make it his own. And Joey's very Meisner in the sense of he was that actor, he was that character the entire time he was on set. He was not Joey. He was walking around as Andrew. And enough
that must have been exhausting.
I'm sure, but it was also annoying to be.
Yeah. Yes. Exhausting for you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you were for him. It's like I told him all the time, every day. I said, dude, I love how much work you're putting into this. Because I told him, like, him and it's really no secret. Him and Rachel really didn't get along off camera, and they're married in the movie. And most of the reason why they didn't get along is because he was in character the whole time, and so he was just kind of like shitty to people. and it's like when we would not be shooting, when we would go back to the hotel or when we'd have a day off, if he was hanging out with me and he was actually helping me a little bit with the script at different times, we would be just sitting there relaxing and having a great time together and having a good discussion. And I like him a lot when he's being Joey. But the rest of the time he was being Andrew, and Andrew's character to me was Jack Torrance.
Yeah.
You unfortunately, in the finished version of the movie, there's a handful of scenes from the beginning of the film when him and Nicole first get to their new house that they removed from the edit because they wanted to conceal the fact that Nicole's pregnant from the audience until the dinner scene.
Sure.
And the problem is that they removed a couple scenes earlier on where they're talking about the pregnancy, and they're talking about how she had a miscarriage prior to this pregnancy, and they're talking about her relationship with Ben and Ashley. And they had to remove all those because of the pregnancy talk. But it's like you're also losing not just this backstory and this explanation for a lot of things. You're also losing a couple sequences that showed Joey, or Andrew rather, as a caring, compassionate, sensitive man, loving husband. And instead, all you get of Andrew is they show up, and 2 minutes later, literally 2 minutes later, Ashley shows up and shits on his parade.
Yeah. Well, he does. He goes from 0 to shitty in 60 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, like, Jason thought, it's like because he picked up on that idea that it's like, yeah, he seems like a sensible, normal human being at the beginning. He's excited for their new house, that he's carrying her across the threshold and everything. And yet, it's like, and what I had kind of noticed was the moment that the name Ashley was mentioned, he just flipped, and that was it, and he was done. And, but I was also picking up, and, and this is something that I maybe sometimes do too, where I'm looking really deeply into those characters. And, you know, and I really saw that as this kind of nice little four-sided societal kind of breakdown of how people handle people who aren't mentally stable. You know, because you have Ashley as somebody who might be actually mentally ill or might actually be haunted. You know, there's a lot of there's a lot of ways to read how some of that might play out.
She's fragile no matter how you take it.
Exactly. And then you have like her brother Ben, who's lived through that as well, but is kind of impotent in the sense that he can't really help her, and he desperately wants to not make it any worse. Whereas you have then Nicole, who's desperately trying to help her, you know, let me in, let me know what's going on, how are you doing, all of that. And then you have Andrew, who's just wants her away from him. And, you know, and it's like, you see that a lot where, you know, you see the raving person on the street, and you see a lot of people who will cross the street to get away from that person, as opposed to just walking by them or, you know, acknowledging their presence or whatever. But it's this really interesting kind of microcosm, I guess, of this little societal mix-up where you have somebody who's not like the others, but the others treat that person in various ways. And I really kind of gravitated towards that when I watched it the first time.
I appreciate that. I'm going to make sure my co-writer Jeremy Silva listens to this, because I think he's going to really appreciate what you guys are saying about this movie and the subtleties that you were picking up with everything, because that I lend that all to him. I sat down with Jeremy the 3rd of November, and by December, whatever it was, December 15th, December 20th, he had a finished draft of the script for me. And it was just so amazing. He was able to create these believable characters, in my opinion, and how each of them was a specific cog in this wheel of insanity versus sobriety, you know, of it all. You know, you've got Ashley, like you said, who's been trying to deal with it, but she just doesn't have the support system to deal with it. And since she was younger when this all happened to her, the trauma sits with her differently than it does with Ben. You know, and Ben has been medicating his whole life and is on a strict regimen of that medication, on top of having the support system of a loving wife with Michelle, who is a bit of a ball buster, but she's very compassionate to him. And unfortunately, that's another aspect of her character that was, for some reason, sacrificed in the edit, and I believe a part of that has to do with the fact that the edit was trying to focus as much on Ashley's degradation, and so every other character was sacrificed. When we were creating the film, the idea was that it was supposed to be an ensemble piece, not specifically directed at one character. So that edit, the lack of cohesion between the script, the direction, and the edit, you know, really caused that to lose its luster, I think. But then you've got Nicole, who's making up for lost time. She is so over the top with Ben and Ashley because she feels like she has to make up for that lost time of not being there for the last however many years she's been living across the country. And so that's what I really liked about it, was that you have a small group of people together in a very tense situation trying to make the best of it, but they can't, because there's this, at the center of it all, there's this mentally unstable person, and it's how is each person handling that person's influence on the dynamic overall. And again, I reiterate that it's really unfortunate. I feel like Andrew's degradation is the biggest casualty to that loss of synchronicity between the development, production, and print and post-production of the film, because I wanted to create The Shining, and Andrew's character was Jack Torrance to me. And it wasn't just him annoyed with Ashley. It's also it's meant to be tenfold, exponentially worse, because of the Rake's influence. The Rake is a pestilence, and it's influencing everybody there. It's not just killing the plants. It's not just rotting the fruit on the kitchen countertop, if you notice that. It's like there's so many subtleties of what the Rake's pestilent nature is doing to everybody and everything there that Andrew wouldn't be that negative and that surly if it wasn't for the Rake's presence being there.
I think that still comes through, and that's definitely Geoff and I, when we were discussing that character, that was sort of one of the questions we had is that sort of the intent? Is it supposed to be the Rake's influence on him that is kind of turning him this way? And I think it still comes through. I would have liked, I think, the earlier scene, like you said, that's disappointing, but still, I think what you intended to do certainly comes to play, and in fact, it might even play the suspense up a little bit more, because I definitely got a Jack Torrance vibe from that character, and I was thinking, okay, is he going to be the Rake, right? Is he going to be the guy who ultimately kills everyone or what have you, right? And so you subvert that as well, and I think that works to the suspense of the story.
And I think that's great that you point that out, because that was the point from the start with when I talked with Jeremy about this idea. Is I want it to be so chock full of red herrings that you have no idea what the reality of the situation is. You know, is there really a monster? Is it going to be Ashley? Is it going to be Andrew? Is it Ben? Is it going to be, you know, something else? And so I'm so glad that you guys picked that up. And I think that the point here that we're showcasing is that you two clearly watched this movie without your cell phone in your face.
Right.
Yeah. And that's how a lot of people watch movies these days, myself included. If I lose interest in a film, I start looking at my phone. You know, I check Facebook, I check Instagram, and unfortunately, when people aren't in the theater seeing a movie where they're completely immersed in the movie, people just don't pay attention to movies, and a film like The Rake needs the audience member to pay close attention to it to get all those nuances.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, the other thing that I really liked about it too is that you're taking your time getting to the monster. There's the terrifying scene in the woods that you can say, "Oh my God, the monster's here," or you know, Ashley's just seeing something, or it's her, you know, but it's effective. It's still a monster, whether it's, you know, tangible, whether it's jumping out of a tree and, you know, throwing stuff at a 3D camera or whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is that you took your time to get to that. Say you didn't want to show that. You didn't want to show the monster outside of the initial criminal in the opening scene. You don't want to show that monster right away, and you want to give it time to breathe, and I think that's so lost in.
Well, you really earn the transformation scene at the end, right? I mean, holy crap! That is one of the coolest practical effects I think I've ever seen. Is that transformation? I mean, it is so gross.
Yeah.
The sound design on that scene is amazing. Like, oh, it does. It feels like a perfect sort of crescendo to the whole movie, and I especially like that it's almost played like The Howling a little bit, where you have is it Ashley at the end, I believe?
Nicole.
No, it's yeah, thank you, Nicole. Where she's sort of stuck in place. She should run away. She should escape this. You know, this is a terrifying thing, but I think she's almost paralyzed by it. So the Howling came to mind. You know, when I saw that scene, I was like, oh my goodness, yeah.
Totally. And the Howling plays a major point off of this. You know, the Howling is in a lot of ways, I love it more than American Werewolf in London. I think that the werewolves in the Howling, as much as American Werewolf had some really awesome effects work too, like when the werewolf is in the subway and it's crawling on its hands and knees, all that was a guy doing a wheelbarrow. You know, basically where he's using his hands and somebody's holding his legs, and they just never showed the back half of the effect. And so the Howling has such a great transformation that I was really definitely trying to channel that with Jason Kane and his effects team building that creature. And, you know, if you guys want a good analysis of that, I highly recommend you go to the YouTube channel and watch our effects breakdown that we recorded on Tuesday or Wednesday. I just uploaded it last night to YouTube. It's got we go through 4 different sequences in the Rake, and we talk about them, and we show behind the scenes footage from them and stuff. And And so that's kind of a neat new perspective for you to get on it. But yeah, it's meant to just be like, obviously she's in so much shock, it's almost like she can't move, because to actually see something like that happening, you just can't believe that it's real. You keep thinking to yourself, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to wake up. And then all of a sudden it's too late and you can't wake up. And it's interesting because that's something to where I still wonder whether or not it's better in the finished product. Originally in the script, I was very adamant about having when Jacob Murphy slits his throat and dies at the beginning of the movie, you're supposed to have it where what I had in the script is that the camera's focused on the kids and you start to hear the transformation take place behind the camera. And the kids are just looking like, and you hear this like, and then it cuts. Rake. And so you're supposed to think, okay, well, what was happening? Because we don't know, because the audience has no idea that the rake actually births out of somebody. But is something happening there? And then you go through the next 75 minutes of the movie wondering what the hell was that alluding to?
Yeah.
And you're finally given the answer to that question at the very end of the movie. And, we knew that effects-wise, our budget for special effects was $7,000 only.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh!
And I have no problem admitting that.
That is astounding. It is astounding.
Yeah,
it looks phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jason Kane is a amazing special effect artist, and the team of people that he worked with, Tom Cassidy and Reed Caesar. Who are, they were out in LA for a while and they've worked on some huge movies like It and Jurassic Park Fallen Kingdom and Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and stuff. They built the creature in the basement of the house that I was living in. They lived with us for 3 weeks and they built this monster suit in our basement. And Jason did the head and all the other death scenes and stuff and then kind of painted the suit and everything. And just that team of people did such an amazing job that you almost don't. I think that hopefully a lot of people don't pay attention to the shortcomings of the effects. Like the creature never moves. The creature doesn't move because the legs, like we put them on stilts, but the stilts are actually attached to a plywood base on the floor that you can't see because the Ben's clothes that are shed off of the body are covering the edges of the plywood base. But the monster doesn't take a step forward or anything like that, but it doesn't need to.
No, it doesn't.
It really doesn't. Yeah. No. You feel like the character, you feel you're transfixed by what you're seeing, and it just profoundly grossed out, which is perfect.
Thank you. Yeah, I had always hoped that that's what audiences would take away from it, and unfortunately modern day horror audiences, they don't have the patience to get to the second half of this movie. They'll turn it off 20 minutes in, especially since it's free everywhere you can watch it. You just watch it on Amazon Prime and it doesn't matter if you turn it off. You're not renting it and having to sit through the whole thing. And that kind of stinks because I think people don't give the movie the opportunity to breathe and get to that payoff. As you said, the crescendo. It's like turning a song off a minute into it and not being able to hear the wicked guitar solo.
Yeah.
Right.
And so my hope was that the audience would be good enough to sit through all the buildup and all the tension and all the red herring development so that, okay, Andrew and Nunez, Jeremy and Michelle, they all get killed by the monster, but their death sequences are really nothing compared to that final transformation sequence. Right. And if you're willing to sit there for the payoff, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, it's one of those things too where it's also like, what is it, about 80 minutes or so in total? But it's very tight. It's very fast paced, but it still also takes its time. It moves along while not moving too fast, and it doesn't. It's less than 90 minutes. This is something I could very easily. There are a lot of people I could very easily talk into watching this, knowing nothing but the title. But the other thing that I want to say is really interesting too is that, this is something that is based off of creepypasta, but it doesn't also feel like it either. Like there's a fully fleshed out movie here. There's their characters. It's not just the monster. It's not just a legend. The legend's not told either. It's just it's all kind of this background stuff that somebody says that this thing will come and come and take these people, but at the same time we're not given that boring exposition scene where somebody is explaining that to the audience. It's just it's kind of its own thing, and that's also very much appreciated because I don't think it matters that you know anything about the story or anything about the creepypasta stuff to it. I think that's just another testament to a really good script and a really good movie in general.
I appreciate that. I think that our original intention was to actually have a title sequence very much like Seven, where you've got newspaper clippings of Ben and Ashley being adopted by Nicole and her father as foster parent, foster family, because nobody understands that dynamic at all. People think that's their cousin. They don't understand the relationship there, and it's meant to be that her mother died and her father, to fill the void because he's this busy, successful businessman, the void of him not being able to be a full-time parent for his daughter Nicole was to adopt and foster these two children so that she has kids to be with. And that's completely lost in the movie. But then on top of that, you also have more of that creature mythos, even just like kind of playing off of those photos and those drawings that were on that board in the dad's office at the beginning. That was really the extent of the explanation that we wanted to provide, as well as maybe spending a little more time with that Jacob Murphy dialogue on the VHS tape at the beginning in the dad's office, getting a little more explanation from his interviews, talking about how his mother was influenced by the Rake. And, like there's this whole sequence where he talks about how she blows her head off with a shotgun. And he, as like a 5-year-old boy, discovers his mother's body in the bathroom and watches the Rake blossom out of her carcass or out of her corpse. And that's when the Rake really, it became more than just an influence. It became like a god to him. It became, a parent. It took the place of his mother and raised him, so to speak. And that's why Jacob Murphy has this affinity for it, and is more willing to do its bidding. So that a lot of that stuff was lost, but it's a catch-22. There's people out there such as yourself who think the ambiguity makes the movie better, and I, for one, don't disagree with you. I don't need my explanation hashed out ad nauseum to me. I want the mystery a little bit, and as Hitchcock the master himself said, sometimes what the audience doesn't see is more scary than what they do.
Yeah, and that's something definitely. Yep. Yeah, and that's definitely something that I saw in the second viewing too. Was that it's like you got that stuff. It's happening kind of in the background. You're still getting something from it, but it doesn't have like I said. You don't have to have a person sitting down talking directly to reverse shot to another character saying, "Oh, this is this, and this is where this legend comes from, and this is where," It's like it is. It's fine that it's kind of coming in through the background too, because it's still saying, it's still there, and it's still fleshing out this whole world.
Well, and unfortunately, I think that only people pay attention to that when they're paying attention to the movie. Otherwise, they don't really catch that.
So what do you think, Tony, about the state of independent horror today? How do you stand out? Do you let the way people view movies now affect how you're going to make a movie, or do you just want to make the movies you want to make and hope for the best? What do you think about that?
It's a really good question, because unfortunately I'm a very traditional horror fan. And by traditional, I just mean 70s and 80s. I mean, I watched, obviously, as a little kid, before my mother let me watch the R-rated stuff, I watched all the black and white stuff. The Thing from Another World and Creature from the Black Lagoon are easily my favorite. But I'm not traditional in that sense. I'm traditional in terms of 70s and 80s slow burn atmospheric horror. Even when it's a slasher style teeny bopper horror film from the 80s, there's still atmosphere in those movies.
Absolutely.
And it's like horror movies nowadays, they try so hard to mimic that, but they throw all the important things that made those movies good out the door immediately. Now, the magic that was in movies back then. That's so much like why, like, as much as I understand why people enjoy movies like the Sharknadoes and all those Sci-Fi Channel horror movies, I get that they enjoy them because they're so silly, they're laughable. But it's like, that's not what I want out of a horror movie. What I want out of a horror movie is to be scared, to be creeped out. And I hate the fact that they don't care about good-looking CGI or taking the time to build practical special effects to make it more effective, not just for the audience, but for the actors to interact with, practical effects. I mean, can you imagine Rachel Melvin had such an easier time acting scared at the end of the Rake because she's sitting at 3 a.m. while we're shooting this in front of this 8-foot-tall monster dripping slime all over her.
Absolutely.
As opposed to looking at a dude in a fucking green condom.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that the climate nowadays, here's I think the best way to answer this, because as you can tell, I'm a bit of a rambler, and I hope you guys appreciate the depth I take with each of my answers. Some directors, you get on here and they'd be like,
Yeah.
There's definitely some filmmakers out there that don't know how to talk to people. But the way I look at it is that there is definitely now more so than in the last even 20 years, I would say, there is a ingrained audience for horror that wants cerebral horror films. And I hate a good chunk of those cerebral horror films. I am not a big fan of Get Out. I think it is a retelling of Stepford Wives and nothing more. I am not a huge fan of the Witch. I think visually, I think story-wise, I think a lot of aspects of that movie are great, but I almost think it's too slow. And you really have to pay attention to that movie. Although I really enjoyed The Lighthouse. I thought that was a great film. As much as, it put my fiance to sleep. So, and then I understand why, because it's kind of boring. I'm not a big fan of Midsummer or Hereditary. I think that those films are completely overemphasized as being these great horror movies. And I think there's benefit. I think there's good things in both of them. But overall, I don't think there's anything wholly original about them that makes them stand out as being the best horror films of the last 5 years. And if The Rake was just marketed appropriately and given the opportunity to breathe to those types of audiences, I really have no doubt that at least even 20% of the audience that loves Get Out and loves The Witch and loves The Lighthouse and loves Midsummer and Hereditary, if even 20% of the audience base that loves those movies was introduced and liked The Rake, it would find its following. But unfortunately, it's not being marketed really at all. The way distribution works these days is that companies pick up a lump of movies and they throw 15 movies out. It's like they fertilize the landscape with these films, and they hope that the films stand for themselves. And you can only do so much marketing and promoting on social media without spending thousands of dollars on Facebook ads that, if you're lucky, get 1,000 people to actually look at it. So I think it's a matter of not so much is it the right environment for this type of horror film. I think any horror film can be successful if it finds its audience. And a great solution, a great example of that is Terrifier. Terrifier is a very audience-specific type of horror film. It is too gory for most people that like just a general horror film from time to time. But the hardcore horror fans, the people who love the hardcore, really gory, independent horror movies, those people love Terrifier. And the reason why it got so big is because it was on Netflix. So everybody saw Terrifier because everybody has Netflix.
Yeah.
So it's like if you have the opportunity to get in front of millions of people, you will find your audience. But if you don't have the money behind your marketing, then it doesn't matter how cool your movie is, or how big the actors are in it, or anything, or how much you promote it, because each of us only has so much time and money to promote it ourselves. So hopefully that answers your question around about
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, really, I had one more question that I wanted to make sure I asked. And Jason, if you've got anything more, we'll put those on deck. But I wanted to, watching Skeletons in the Closet, which was the first movie of yours that I actually had seen. I saw that at Horror Hound in Cincinnati last year. And a little bit after, because I saw that it was playing right before like the Horror Host Hall of Fame, and there was a horror host there that I've watched for years now, and it was like, oh, I want to be there to see her get inducted in, and I'll watch this movie that kind of seems to fit into this mood, and everything. So a little bit after that, I had gone to the table, got the movie, got a shirt, and also got the Rake, because I think you had kind of explained a little bit about what the Rake was, and I was like, yeah, that sounds like something that I'm into. So, so I got those. But one of the things that you were kind of talking about in the commentary for Skeletons was that, you had these two young actresses in the wraparound story, and how they seemed to kind of show up with this kind of fully formed idea of what their characters were. And you'd kind of praised that, they didn't really need a whole lot of extra, that they had kind of already had this really good idea of who they were and what their characters were about. And I was curious about that, because on the other end of that spectrum, you had three very rooted and longtime actors in High and the Hog. And I was curious, like, how those two different experiences worked out for you, because it's like you hear a lot of stories about like a lot of older B movie stars. They kind of show up every week, they're shooting someplace, so sometimes they don't know fully what's going on with the script that they're just arriving to film on, and then in a few days they're gone or whatever. Whereas like, I don't doubt that they're still very professional, but I'm sure that there was some sort of difference between working with like Joe Estevez, Robert Zadar, and Sid Haig, as opposed to these two young actresses that seem to really kind of understand their characters a little bit better.
Well, have you seen High on the Hog?
Yes, I have.
Oh. So you've seen everything of mine except for It's My Party. And have you seen
that is correct. I have not seen that, and some of your shorts I haven't seen. I did see Chance in Hell.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah. Well, I appreciate this, guys. Wow. Yeah. It means a lot to me. And I also want to say, too, like, I'm fine to talk as long as you want. This is exciting to me. I've been looking for this for weeks now. So if you want to keep asking questions, we spent a long time talking about the Rake. Let's talk about Skeletons or A Chance in Hell or whatever else. As long as you guys don't have to go, that's up to you.
No, we've still got a little bit of time. So yeah, we're good.
Okay. Yeah. Because you're helping me promote my stuff. So as far as I'm concerned, I'll take all the time. Movies. I love this shit. Although I might have to plug my computer in. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, no problem.
This can be the commercial break. So with Skeletons in the Closet, Jamie, so you're referring to Jamie and Tina, the babysitter and the little girl?
Yes.
So I'd always had the idea for Skeletons in the Closet in my head. I've had that idea in my head since I was, in college, about doing this horror host and hostess combination, because there's never, from my experience, been a combination. It's always one or the other, a guy or a girl. And so I just wanted to combine them. I figured Elvira married to the Crypt Keeper is a great dynamic, especially if she's the reason why he's dead.
Yeah.
And so always been there. And then when we had shot Chop Shop, which was my short film, Grandma O'Malley's Pantry, the co-director's short film, The Dismantler, and then we had the wraparound where it was the first-person point of view of the guy being processed through purgatory, is basically what that is. That was part of a film called Chop Shop where there were 2 other 20-minute short films involved. And after we spent a few years with that kind of in the background while we were doing the Rake and World of Death, which we also haven't talked about at all, and some other projects like The Muck and stuff, we kind of just ultimately disbanded Chop Shop. And so my co-director Ben and I took our 2 short films and we were like, do we just release them, as short films? What do we do with them? And we had 2 or 3 other ideas for wraparound content. And then I eventually pitched Ben and Robert Patrick Stern and everybody else the idea of Skeletons in the Closet. But I thought if we really wanted to beef it up beyond just the host and hostess, it was bring this little girl and babysitter on board too. And to me, that was just a retelling of your and my childhood. It's when I was a kid and my parents went out for the night, I was trying to watch whatever I wasn't allowed to watch when they were home. I remember I had gotten a copy of Friday the 13th Part 4 and that I had taped on a blank VHS tape. And when my mom found it, she put it on top of the refrigerator in the kitchen. And as soon as I knew where it was, every time she went out for the night, I crawled up on the countertop, grabbed the movie, and popped it in the VCR. Yep. And so, sorry, Mom. You should have hit it better. She'll be happy to know I never went up onto the top shelf and grabbed the Rambo knife that she took from me when I was 11 years old. So I never did that. I only grabbed the movie. But so to me, the Jamie Tina storyline really didn't need any development because it was my childhood. I was Jamie, albeit I was a boy, obviously. But Lainey is one of my good friend Karen's daughter, and all 3 of her kids are actors. And I knew I wanted a child about 9 years old who's still young enough to be filled by the magic of movies, especially in the 80s, but who's not too young to where they shouldn't be watching this content. And so Lainey was the perfect age, and I'd hung out with my friend Karen and her kids a number of times at that point. So Lainey just had a great personality and everything, and it just worked out perfectly. And then Elizabeth, who plays the babysitter Tina, I found her on a casting call website like Backstage.com. I just did a general casting call for a babysitter character, late teens babysitter. And she's one of, there's probably 3 or 4 girls that were pretty decent that I liked. And Elizabeth was just the best of the best and had a great look. And so those characters came naturally because they were realistic to me, versus where you look at something like The Rake, or even any of the characters in like Grandma O'Malley's Pantry. It's like, that's a little more difficult to relate to because they're more supernatural based. And, I'm very fortunate to not be surrounded by a lot of different types of situations and things. So, I'm not, the people that I don't know. I'll just leave it at that. I don't really know how to take that further, but I think it was just easiest because they were based on real characters versus characters that are not real, to me, or my co-writers.
Sure. No, and one of the things about Skeletons in the Closet that, like I said, I saw it because it was playing before something that was dealing with like horror hosts, like the Horror Host Hall of Fame or whatever at Horror Hound. And, it's like, I assume that was something that you two also grew up with. Like here in Indianapolis, we had Sammy Terry, so it's like, and I had 3 older brothers. So, like, I was seeing things that I definitely should not have been seeing at the age of 5. Like, I think I went to see Creepshow in the theater or something, But anyway, but, like, I really kind of did see that appreciation for that kind of, hey, it's Friday night, Saturday night, parents are either out or you're just in your room and you happen to have cable or you have a good set of rabbit ears in your room. You can kind of get away with watching some stuff. I did also appreciate that where you film that portion of skeletons was pretty much untouched since the 80s. It sounded like, like you had like the old console TV, the old, the fireplace that's like in the brick facing and stuff like that. It's like all of that stuff. That was the 80s to me, man. I mean, that was.
Yeah, the basement where we shot the Widow and Charlie stuff was our sound guy Joe Meglio's grandma's house. And she's just, she was an old Italian grandma who has since passed away. But she had this old basement that was still very 1960s. And what I wanted the basement where Charlie's being kept to be was something that looks like it hasn't been touched for many years prior to where the movie takes place in 1986. Because we have to make it look like the widow's been hiding her husband down there for some time now. And so that worked out perfectly. I could not have asked for a better scenario to get a location untouched like that. And then the living room where Jamie and the babysitter are watching TV is the house I used to live in for a number of years, is my friend Jim Peterson's house. And Jim has kind of kept the house very much so in the 80s from how it was when he grew up there as a child. And it's interesting because everything is, so much older. It takes you back to being a kid again as soon as you step in the house in a lot of ways. And so we had shot the muck there. That's where the muck takes place, the bathroom and everything. And so we knew, like, I was like, look, if you let us shoot here, logistically it makes sense because we live here, so it's easy to manage the set, and we're not traveling to get to set or anything. But it's the exact look that I'm going for, because this reminds me of my family room when I was a little boy. And then all we had to do was find a big old TV, which we were looking for anyway, because my company logo, Scotchworthy Productions, is the old TV with the old VCR and the symbol on the TV screen. Yeah. So we already had the TV for that.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And one other question that just kind of popped in my head, just because of, we were just talking about like the types of movies that we would watch, growing up and stuff. And I don't know, this is just kind of one of those silly questions. It almost feels like a job interview question, but if you had, if money was no object, what type of movie would you go for? A big budget horror movie, or would you try your hand at something like an action movie, or what would be the if money was no object, kind of a dream type of project would you like to be involved with?
I mean, that's kind of a loaded question, because
sure.
It's tough. It's a cool question, but it's so hard for me to answer it straight, because the way I would do it is I would finagle it. I would say, well, nobody's going to give somebody like me $100 million to make the next Marvel movie.
Sure.
So if someone was to come to me and say, I've got $10 million, what do you want to make? I would say, let's make 6 movies for, $1 million each. Let's make 2 movies for $500,000 each, and then let's make 1 movie for $3 million after we've made those other films for $7 million. Because to me, boy, I'm impressed at my math right there. Because to me, that's getting the most bang for your buck. Right now, independent horror movies are being made for anywhere from, if you're at the independent circuit level, the convention level, they're being made for $5,000, $10,000 a piece. If you're going to independent level of like the South by Southwest and the Scream Fests and the Toronto After Dark Film Festival type of circuit, those movies are anywhere from probably, I'd say, $500,000 upwards of $4 million. You go to Sundance, and a horror movie at Sundance is probably a $5 million movie only. And so the thought of being able to enter that market with just this catalog of content and say, here, oh, you don't like Haunted House? Well, guess what? Here's a monster movie. You don't want a monster movie? Well, here's a psychological thriller. And that way, it's like you're almost targeting every single demographic out there. And we can do a hell of a lot with $1 million budget while everybody's still getting paid a decent enough amount of money to be able to live off of. And that to me is the true goal. Is as much as I would love $100 million movie, because that means I'm making $3 million to direct it or whatever. But the goal is to take care of the people who are working on the movie, who are lending their time and their talent to it, by paying them enough to where they feel not just enthusiastic because they're a part of a cool project and they know you appreciate them, but because they're getting paid well too and they don't have to focus on other shit. And also, and that means then too that I don't have to do my full-time job anymore, you know? And hopefully chances, you know, you talk percentages, I would say if we're producing at that point $6 million movies, you know, 2 $500,000 movies and a $3 million movie, you're looking at, you know, just shy of 10 films there. That to me dictates that we're going to definitely have 1 or 2 of them be a success.
Sure.
You know,
well, that's yeah. I think that's kind of the well. First of all, I mean, of course, that's a Roger Corman kind of way of you know, taking a lump sum and seeing what you can break out from that. But also, I mean, hell, one of the most successful movies of this year only cost $7 million at the Invisible Man. You know, so it's kind of that Blumhouse idea where it's like we can do a lot with smaller and pump them out and get somebody. You know, somebody will, or one of those will catch on. So yeah, I mean that's a very pragmatic way of looking at it, I think. And
I think that the true reason behind that, the answer to this question is that you say Roger Corman and you say Blumhouse. And Blumhouse is the modern day Roger Corman. The only difference is that his stuff isn't as schlocky as Roger Corman, because I think he's, as much as I love Roger Corman and respect the shit out of Roger Corman didn't care as much about content. He didn't care as much about story, whereas Blumhouse at least focuses a bit more on that. But that being said, what that is proving is that it's not necessarily the content as much as it is the avenue by which the content is exposed to the audience base. Yeah. You know, if I was able to make a movie and have Blumhouse promote it, it would be successful. If I was able to make a movie and have someone to the degree of which Blumhouse is releasing movies, release it, it would be successful. And so all that is a testament to how important marketing and connectivity is in the filmmaking industry. And that is furthermore why I say I would make 8 or 9 movies and say, here's 9 movies, which ones get accepted to which festival, which ones get seen by a studio or a producer like Blumhouse. You know, you can, I know a lot of filmmakers who have gone to Blumhouse's office in LA and had a meeting at Blumhouse, and they say, oh, I had a great meeting at Blumhouse. You know, they're interested in my story. And, you know, maybe something happens, maybe something doesn't. But to me, if I walked in the door at Blumhouse and said, here's 9 films, here's a pitch deck that'll take you 15 minutes to flip through, and if any of them catch your attention and you want to read the script or you want to watch the movie, here's the movie to watch. Do you like it? Do you want to buy it? Do you want to represent it? The rest is history at that point. Then it's like, okay, it gets out there and it makes $100 million. And everybody makes a shit ton of money, and it's super successful. And now we all move on and get to make more movies. Like, you know, you look at Lee Wanell, however you pronounce his name. He's not making humongously produced movies. You know, his movies aren't $50 million budgets. But the reason why they're successful is because he's got a great team of people producing it, marketing it, selling it, distributing it. And that's all based off of his prior experience of being involved with with James Wan on Saw and everything. And so he finally got his opportunity to direct. I think the first one he did was Insidious 3. And then it just went from there. People said, okay, you're not just a competent screenwriter, you're also a competent filmmaker. What else you got for us? And he just kept building it up. And so that to me is really the goal is, you know, there might be people in the Midwest who know who Tony Wash and Scotchworthy Productions is, but at the end of the day, I'm not big enough and I don't have enough money to market myself and my products outside of the Midwest. So until I get something or somebody that takes me and says, we're going to take you from here and put you up here, which is going to get you out to it's a larger umbrella, so to speak.
Right.
I'm going to continue being that Midwest filmmaker who's pumping out, hopefully people believe quality horror content at the independent level.
Are you still developing The Storm?
I would love to say yes, but The Storm is something that we did a lot of development of that, and we wrote the script back in 2011. That was kind of going to be my follow-up to A Chance in Hell in the event that A Chance in Hell didn't get made into a feature length. Because we had a feature-length script for A Chance in Hell that a couple different teams of people picked up and were optioning and then never got made, unfortunately, because then they made it a few years later as Overlord, and it's the same freaking thing, but, So The Storm was something that we were developing. We did a Kickstarter. We raised $25,000 of a $100,000 goal, which was pretty great at the time. But, obviously we didn't get the money, and I didn't want to take money if we weren't going to get our full goal anyway. So it's kind of always been on the back burner because I realize, as realistic as it may be, pessimistic, that The Storm is out of our reach right now. That movie would need a multi-million-dollar budget, and we're just not capable of raising that kind of money yet. Right now, my approach would be to get, a movie or a couple movies slated for the $500,000 range, I think, or below that, but to where I would have the capability of shooting that around my work schedule. We're talking remaking It's My Party. It's got a sequel to it also called You Would Die Too, If It Happened to You.
That sells itself, man. You got that.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's great.
Nice that somebody out there who had money agreed to that sentiment.
Yeah, right.
And then, I've got about a half a dozen other concepts that's kind of what I'm utilizing my time with. You were saying it earlier. It's not just developing the Scotchworthy TV content, but also, aside from the personal stuff, I've been working on developing these concepts. At this point, I'm working with 3 different co-writers on 3 different scripts. I've got a couple other ones that I tinker with from time to time, but I'm not much of a writer myself. And I've also got, people that are helping me develop my pitch packet so that when we do get out of this bullshit, if I haven't had meetings prior to that, virtual meetings with people, which we have a couple right now that are developing, then it's like I can go out to LA for 4 days or whatever on my 4 days off each week and sit down at a couple of different meetings with some studios and say, here's my pitch deck, here's my previous catalog of film work, 15 years worth of stuff, and, go from there. So, it's funny, I never answered your question about working with Sid and them.
Yeah. Well, we can circle back around to that. I mean, those are like Robert Zadar, Sid Haig. I mean, those two alone are, I can't tell you how many times I've seen movies with their names in it, but and also Joe Estevez. I mean, he's done some fun stuff too, but Robert Zadar, I thought was really, really good in High on the Hog, because, with Sid Haig and Joe Estevez, I kind of felt like you were getting Sid Haig and Joe Estevez. But with Robert Zadar, he's playing this small town, southern sounding, easygoing mayor of this tiny town. I was not used to seeing him so laid back, or at least so kind of down to earth like that. So yeah, if you have any stories about them that you'd like to share, that would be fantastic. Well,
the coolest aspect of it, Robert Zadar lived close by. We were shooting in Galena and Elizabeth, Illinois. This was back in August and September of 2012. And Robert Zadar lived just across the Mississippi River in Iowa. And so he didn't stay with us. But the rest of the cast and crew, including Sid Haig and Joe Estevez, lived in a roadside motel just outside of Galena, Illinois, for the better part of a month. And that is a story in and of itself. You know, I don't remember every moment of it because it was 8 years ago, and it's been a long time since then, you know, but my brain is flooded with a bunch of stupid shit since then. But those are some of the best memories and some of the worst memories of my 15-year filmmaking career. You know, working on High on the Hog, getting hired to direct High on the Hog was amazing in and of itself. We originally got hired, Jason Kane and I got hired to do the special effects, and Rob was cinematographer, and so they, you know, the producer on the film at the time had a couple conversations with me on the phone, and she was asking me all these producing questions because she had been to the premiere of A Chance in Hell and was like, you know, you did quite an impressive job producing that film. And she started asking me all these questions. And after the third 2-hour phone conversation I had with this woman, I'm like, am I going to get an associate producer credit? Are you going to pay me something for all this advice I'm giving you? Or are you asking me to, like, direct your movie? And she pretty much just said, you know, I have to talk to the executive producer, but I'm looking to have you direct the movie. They weren't too thrilled with their current director, I guess, wasn't able to focus as much attention on the film as they wanted him to during pre-production. So she talked to the executive producer, and, you know, shortly thereafter, they asked me to direct the movie, and it was a dream come true for me. You know, I'd worked with Tom Savini on It's My Party and I'll Die If I Want To, which was an experience in and of itself. It was good and bad in a couple different ways, you know, which I'm happy to talk about if need be. But the thought of working with Sid was just really awesome because Sid had a really great following at the conventions, and I always really enjoyed Sid. I was a big fan of Spider Baby. Yeah. I love Galaxy of Terror. And then when you start delving even deeper into Sid's career, you see that he was on the original Star Trek. He was on the original Batman. He was on MacGyver. And it's like that to me just got me that much more excited. Mm-hmm. And then the flip side of it is I'm working with Joe Estevez and Robert Zadar, which I had a filmmaker that I had worked with at an advertising company who had worked with Joe Estevez on a project and had a lot of bad stories. You know, I know there was a period of time where Joe and Robert were very much the party animals and didn't take their roles as actors in a project seriously. And so, and then, you know, everybody has their vices and shit. You know, there's nothing to that. And I kind of just said to myself, I'm like, look, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to do everything I can to manage these personalities, and hopefully I can. And if not, it's ultimately not my job to do so. And to be honest, going into High on the Hog, my mentality was, I'm going to direct this movie. I'm going to add another feature to my belt, or, you know, to my catalog under my belt. Because I had been hired to direct another movie prior to that, this $10,000 slasher film that coincidentally had Joey Bachicki in it, who I worked with later. Nice. And I'm so glad I didn't take the job because it was a clusterfuck of a movie from the look of it after the fact, and I have no problem saying that. But I won't say the name of the movie, but I have no problem saying that. But it's like, there were so many times after I didn't take that job that I kicked myself because I was like, you know, here you are saying, well, I don't want to take a $10,000 feature job directing because you don't want to ruin your reputation with a bad movie. But then there's that other half of you that's sitting here now, hindsight, saying you need to build your catalog and you need more experience and you should have taken the job because you could have still made that movie as much yours as you had the ability to. So that's what I thought I'd do with High on the Hog. And so I went into High on the Hog very much so expecting it to be a paid job, and that's all it was going to be. I didn't really relate to the script. It wasn't horror, obviously. It's Grindhouse. But I was excited to work with my film family again. I knew that I could trust that they were going to handle a lot of things so it wouldn't be a total clusterfuck. And I was excited to shoot a movie for a month instead of bartend. That was awesome, you know. Mm-hmm. So, and my girlfriend and I at the time were basically at the end of our relationship, and so it was a good opportunity for me to get out of the house for a month and just like avoid the depression of the fact that we were ending our relationship and, you know, she was moving out. So it worked out, you know, all encompassing. It happened to work out. And, you get out there, and Sid right out the gate is a really cool guy, and he was super nice and very respectful to me, and very willing to listen to my opinion and stuff. And then the same thing with like Joe and Robert. Robert from the beginning too was an amazing person. Just a wonderfully kind-hearted man. I really miss him because he was a real gem of a person to work with. And then Joe Estevez was the same way, where it's like I went in with this preconceived notion that these guys were going to be a handful. And in reality, they had stepped beyond that period in their lives where they were, abusing whatever they were abusing and just not being nice people. And they really, Joe, as soon as I met Joe, it's funny because it's like I walked into this barn or this little cabin that they were using for wardrobe on this farm that we were shooting on. The first scene that I shot with Joe and Sid was the argument when Joe Estevez comes to them and they're at the pig pen picking out the pig to slaughter for the big barbecue. Mm-hmm. And so the first scene with the two of them is this argument, dialogue scene between these two powerhouse actors, which at the time were the biggest people that I'd ever worked with. And to this capacity probably still are the biggest names I've worked with. And so I was just like, oh my God, I'm so intimidated. Like, how am I going to handle these personalities? And it furthermore solidified when I'm walking into this cabin for the wardrobe department and Joe's walking out and I like opened the door for him and he kind of like brushed me off almost as if kind of like, oh yeah, thanks for opening the door for me kind of thing, but like get the fuck out of my way,
Yeah, right.
And I was just like, fuck, dude, that's kind of shitty. And it wasn't like he was being mean. He was brief,
Right.
Because he didn't know who I was. And not that makes it any better or any easier, and I'm not pointing him out as being an asshole, because he's far from an asshole. Joe was great. But it's like once he walked on the set and saw me talking to Sid and comes up and they're like, Tony, Joe, this is the director, Tony. He's like, oh, nice to meet you. I'm really sorry earlier. I'm like, I don't care. As long as you don't treat the crew like that, I don't care,
Right.
And he was very cool, very nice. And the great thing about them is that we had a lot of struggles on High on the Hog. 5 days into producing the film, the producer, the one who hired me, this girl, she ended up leaving the production. And so we had to, in a scramble, basically Robert Patrick Stern, Sid Haig, and I we got field promoted to producers on the film, because otherwise we would have ended up sending everybody home. So that when that happened on the fifth day, like the first 4 days of shooting, it was a movie. Everything was running smoothly. We were making our days more or less, but we were just slightly building the camaraderie. And then once that fifth day happened and that shift in the dynamic of the set occurred, then everything changed and we became a family. And that was really awesome, because at that point on, it's like every night we would get done shooting, we'd go back to the motel and we'd have a parking lot party. And, and Sid and I would have some great times. I've told this story 1,000 times and I'll keep telling it 1,000 times because it's an amazing story where we had one day where it was kind of tough. We were reshooting a bunch of scenes that we had originally shot before this producer had left, because she was also an actor in the movie. So we had to replace her and reshoot the stuff we'd shot with her. So that put us a little behind. And so, we were a little stressed out and stuff. And at the end of the shoot day, I just kind of walked up to Sid and I was like, you want to go get a beer? And he's like, fuck yeah. And so Sid and I and the guy who was his handler, who was a friend of the executive producers that was staying with us for a couple of weeks to make sure Sid got everything he needed. The three of us went to this little podunk bar in Elizabeth, Illinois, and there was one like other drunk sitting at the end of the bar, and it was just the three of us sitting there drinking cans of Busch Light at a bar. If that gives you any idea of where we were, and it was one of the most wonderful experiences that I will have of being a filmmaker that I'll always have with me, you know, up here and in here. And that's really a moment where Sid and I, you know, we both had issues with certain aspects of the script and the story and stuff. We, you know, I sat down, I just talked to him. I said, look, you know, I have this problem with the fact that it looks like we're making two different movies here. We've got this, the movie was very tongue-in-cheek, very cheesy, very hokey, very, very dirty and grungy. And I understand that that's Grindhouse at the core. Sure. But the way that these characters were, the way the actors were playing the characters was very real. And so it's like the film, just because of those aspects of the script, of the characters and the dialogue and stuff, the actors were taking these characters in a much more realistic manner, and it lended itself to making the movie more serious and dramatic. And so as a result, Sid and I were just like, it's weird because we're making this movie that has these very serious dramatic parts, and then it's interjected with these aspects of just sheer, stupidity, you know? And it's just super hokey and silly, and it's ruining these beautiful characters and this story of family and trust and loyalty that at the core is, I think, the most important thing about this movie. And so Sid and I pretty much kind of said, look, you know, what do you think we should do about this? And Sid looked at me and he literally said, you are the director. You have to do what you think is best for the story. And so I went that night and I kind of thought about it. Sid bought me a 12-pack of beer, of Busch Light. Take back to the motel. He went to bed and I kept drinking. And the next day I woke up and we were shooting this huge barbecue scene in the movie where we had the band playing on the stage and stuff. And this is like the 11th day of shooting now out of like 24 days. So we're about halfway through. And I took Sid's advice to heart, and I got in the car with my buddy Jim. We were driving all the way back 3 hours to St. Charles to get a generator for the scene. And in the car, I called the executive producer and I said, this is what I'd like to do. Is that cool? And he said, you know, whatever you guys think needs to be done to make this movie good, do it. And so once I had that blessing, then I basically rewrote half of the script, not half of it, but I'd say 30% of the script in the car, in that drive. And I got back, they were setting up the barbecue sequence. I sat down at a picnic table with all the main cast members, including Sid, and Sid basically told them, he said, you know, guys, Tony and I had this talk. This is what Tony wants to do. Listen to Tony. And it was so cool to have that vote of confidence and that, I can't think of the word. What's the word I'm thinking of? That when somebody supports somebody like a politician, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Advocate?
Yeah.
Advocate works, yeah. But, anyways, to have that advocate there for me, and the rest of the cast and crew was like, yep, let's do it. And that included a handful of different scenes where we just further developed that idea of the family, them sitting and having breakfast at that picnic table out in the field on a beautiful morning, and Katrina's character, Lucy, comes up and, you know, they welcome her to the table with open arms and share their meal and share their table with her. And sequences like that didn't exist in the original film, but they were brought on board to further develop that drama that we were going for. And so I think that all in all, long answer to your question, I apologize, is that it was intimidating initially to go into that situation because I was afraid of what it was going to turn into. But thankfully, the people that were there were so believing in the project and in each other that we were able to create a really awesome family and story out of that. And it was a wonderful experience.
That's awesome, Tony. Thank you.
I can easily say this is one of the best interviews I've ever been a part of, and I've been getting interviewed for, a dozen years now. You guys were critical, analytical, you were well-spoken, you were informed, and I just appreciate all of that because I wasn't talking to a brick wall. I was talking two people who are very interested in our work and very analytical of it, which is great. And you absorbed a lot of really cool aspects from that movie as well as Skeletons, you said. Look forward to talking about it with you.
Yeah, well, we greatly appreciate it. So, where can people find your work and your various movies and shorts?
So you can go to scotchworthy.com. Scotchworthy is one word, but like a bottle of scotch, and worthy, like we are not worthy. That's how I always kind of point it. Scotchworthy also has a YouTube channel that you can go to check out a whole bunch of our stuff. It's Scotchworthy TV. There is a space between Scotchworthy and TV. Go there, check out the watch parties that are up there, and I'm going to be putting more content up there. I want to start really beefing up the channel because I just started the channel like 2 or 3 weeks ago. You can find the Rake and Skeletons in the Closet and High on the Hog on Amazon Prime. You have to rent High on the Hog, but the other two are free if you have Prime. You can find them on Tubi. You can find them on Vudu, iTunes, pretty much anywhere that you can stream video at this point has all three of those films. I also did my first feature is called It's My Party and I'll Die If I Want To, which is a choose your own adventure movie. You can do the choose your own adventure version of it yourself with the DVD if you pick that up from my website or from seeing me at one of the horror conventions across the country. We've got plenty of other shorts and stuff like that as well. I also curate BloodyDisgusting.com's web series World of Death, and we feature short horror films from around the world. We've featured over 500 films and represent more than 50 countries at this point, which is pretty cool. So that's a monthly episodic show that we feature through BloodyDisgusting.com's YouTube channel, and I'm going to probably start syndicating that on my own YouTube channel so people can check those out there too. Lots of really awesome stuff by some really amazing filmmakers to check out. For the last year, have been curating and hosting a panel at the Days of the Dead's called the No Bullshit Horror Filmmaking Roundtable, where instead of it being a traditional panel where the filmmakers or the actors or whatever are at a table and the audience is sitting at chairs. Instead, I have everybody gather around a large table and everybody shares their experiences together, so it becomes more of a discussion that we can all learn from, and hopefully these independent filmmakers get a lot of advice out of it from multiple perspectives. And so I want to transition those over to being more of a viral type thing. And I've been hosting them with Vincent DeSanti, who directed Never Hike Alone.
Oh, yeah.
And so him and I have been doing those. He did 2 of the last 3 with me, and so we just talked the other day about transitioning them to video because he's in LA and I'm in Chicago, and we're probably going to get another friend of ours, Brandon Lasker, who's a producer out of Baltimore, who's done a number of things, and the 3 of us will kind of co-host it, and that'll just be one of the other shows. A handful, hopefully, if I can spread myself thin and not worry about not developing scripts and not developing other movies, which I'm also doing right now too. So,
very cool.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you again for spending some time with us. We hope to talk again. Actually, that would be great to go a little bit further into some of the things that we only had time to kind of briefly touch upon. So. But yeah, thank you so much again, Tony, and for everybody else, we look forward to checking out or continuing to put out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday, new Monster Mondays every Monday. But thank you again, Tony, and
thanks so much, Tony. Really appreciate your time. It was a fascinating discussion, and we look forward to seeing more from you in the future.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to have me on here to help promote some of our work. And again, for all the wonderful compliments that you fed to every aspect of these films. I know a lot of hard people. A lot of people worked hard. A lot of hard people.
A lot of hard people worked.
a lot of hardworking people on these films. Really appreciate fans such as yourselves, enjoying them like you do. So thank you. And then I'm happy to be on the show at any point in time. I'd love to talk further about these or hopefully have a new project out that we can talk about. So
definitely,
let's keep
definitely for sure.
Yeah, thank you again.